would your life be different if you were not a Christian? What if you were not a member of Encino Presbyterian Church or attended worship here? What if you had no interest in God? Would you see the world in the same way that you do as a person of faith? Probably not. What would you miss about church if you weren't here on Sunday mornings? If you had never met the people you have met at church, how great a loss would that be for you? Can you imagine? Yeah. How would you spend your time differently? Would you be home working the New York Times crossword puzzle on Sunday morning instead of doing it in the afternoon? Of course. I know you well. Yes. What do you do because you're a Christian that makes you happy? I'm assuming, of course, that being a Christian makes you happy, I guess. Which religious activities could you do without? Prayer? Singing? Worship? Oh my gosh, maybe a few less meetings. What would be easier if you weren't a Christian in your life? Would it be easier? Do you wish you still had all the money you've given away to the church? Oh yeah. If you were not a Christian, would your life be less interesting? I think mine would. I know mine would be, yeah. Now, researchers seem to get a kick out of studying why people go to church and why they don't. Here are the top 10 reasons given by Americans who attend religious services at least once a month. And this is a Pew survey. The survey respondents could give more than one reason. And the percentages at the end, in the parenthesis there, represent their answers to these questions with the phrase, very important. So that's where you get those numbers. So let's take a look at the list. To become closer to God, 81%. Nice, huh? So their children will have a moral foundation. Makes sense. To become a better person. Like that. For comfort in times of trouble and sorrow, indeed. They find the sermons valuable. Oh, Shaw. All right. To be part of a faith community. To continue their family's religious traditions. Now, I have to ask here, how many of you were born and raised Presbyterian? Oh, yes. Or Christian, some other tradition, Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist. Yes. Okay. They feel obligated to go. I think that's my generation, maybe. Not so much my nieces and nephews, for sure. Yeah, okay. To meet new people or to socialize. Sure. To please their family, spouse, or partner. We are good people, to be sure. Okay. African Americans are more likely than whites or Latinos to say that becoming closer to God, being a better person, and finding spiritual solace in tough times are top reasons for attending religious services. Okay. The weekly sermon is less a draw for Catholics than other Christians. Don't know what's going on there. More women say there are a variety of reasons for going to religious services, while men more commonly say they sit in the pew to please their spouse. That's not true here, is it? Yeah. Okay. A healthy slice of adults younger than 30, or millennials, as we know and love them, say they visit the sanctuary mainly to socialize. Perhaps coincidentally, they are also less likely than older churchgoers to say they feel God's presence at services. So I have to ask, why are older people more likely to feel God at church? Is there something in our makeup that opens us to religious experiences as we age, do you think? Or Maybe more younger Americans are searching outside of sanctuaries for the divine. So that brings up our next slide. This is the same study, the same Pew Research. And this is the top reasons respondents gave for skipping regular religious services. They practice their faith in other ways. Makes sense. They are not believers. No reason is very important. Remember, the phrase very important was what the criteria was for getting on the list. Yeah. They haven't found a house of worship they like. Oh dear. They don't like the sermons. Oh well, we'll try harder. They don't feel welcome. What's going on there? Oh dear. They don't have the time. I get that one. Now, look at this. Poor health or mobility. What do you think's going on there? No house of worship in their area. Okay. So, the believers most likely to say they practice their faith in other ways aren't spiritual freelancers with a disdain for discipline. They're Republican women in their 50s, and a lot of them are Christian. That blew me away. I had no idea. Okay. Of those who believe in religion but don't regularly attend religious services, nearly 7 in 10 still identify with a particular tradition, including 6 in 10 who say that they are indeed Christian. Now, more than half of the people who believe but don't attend religious services regularly are women. Many say they haven't found a house of worship they like, and so practice their faith in different ways or other ways. And why so many women fail to find a house of worship they like? More than 6 in 10, that's over half, said it's because they have poor health or difficulty getting around. That seems like a problem we could probably solve, right? More than half, 54%, said it's because they haven't felt welcomed by congregations. That's troubling. That's troubling. Over half, yeah. So, by now you're asking, what does all of this have to do with the calling of Simon and Andrew as disciples? I hear you. All right. Now, I'm sure the disciples must have thought at some point in time during all that process about how different their lives would have been had they never met Jesus. It started so quietly. John the Baptist is standing with 2 of his students when Jesus just walks by. John says, "That's the one, he's the one. You know how brash I can be. I'm not worthy to tie his sandals." Now, these 2 fledgling disciples are understandably curious. They start following Jesus, who turns around and asks, "What are you looking for?" I think they must answer nervously, "We thought we would see where you're staying." In other words, "We have nothing better to do, so we're wondering what you're doing." Right? You look interesting. Jesus extends an invitation that will change their lives. Come and see. Don't you love how Jesus never answers questions directly? Oh my gosh, yes. They stay with Jesus all day because he is interesting. They have no idea what they're getting themselves into, however. They don't know that they will end up leaving their nets, their boats, their homes, their friends, their families, their work, and their lives as they have known them. They will end up changing their ideas about almost everything. Such is the way of discipleship. Now Andrew goes to get his brother Simon. "You have to come see this guy," he says. I kind of imagine that Simon is dragged along, going more so that his brother will leave him alone than out of any great faith. When Jesus meets Simon, he says, "Your name is going to be Rock." Now, the often addled Simon is anything but a rock. But everything is starting to change. It seems to me that most of the time we move toward God in small steps, taken as much out of curiosity as out of faith. What do you need to know about someone before you start following them? So many of us came to this through the experience of others. We grew up in this environment. Do you suppose Jesus and John invited people into discipleship who declined the invitation? Who probably had really good reasons for not going into this fledgling movement? We never hear about them, do we? There's no mention of anybody who didn't say yes. Now, it must be noticed that we are only in the first chapter of John's gospel, but already Jesus is being identified as a sacrificial lamb. He is also tagged as a beloved and only begotten child of the heavenly parent, but he will ultimately be a sacrifice for our sins. Do you think the disciples really heard and really understood what was being proclaimed here this early on? Maybe it just sounded intriguing. Come and see is how the disciples' story begins. It is also the message we get from the prophet Isaiah that Lucy read to us this morning. It's an invitation to explore, discover, and travel without knowing exactly where you are going. But to know that if you catch a glimpse of God, we will also catch a glimpse of who we are. Come and see. What are you looking for? Come and see what it means to hope, to believe, and to follow. Were these not also the words of Martin Luther King Jr.? Like all the prophets before him, he called us to seek the meaning of life, join with people on the journey, and ask God to help us see where grace invites us. He asked us to look at the gifts we've been given and then look at the needs of the world, just like putting that puzzle together with the kids this morning. He asks us to step to the plate. He would have liked Ralph Lazo, who, as a matter of conscience, lived for 3 years with his Japanese-American friends in the Manzanar internment camp up in Central California. Perhaps some of you have driven by it. This was during World War II. Ralph stayed in the internment camp for 3 years in solidarity with his friends as a prisoner by choice, acting from his conscience. He finished his studies at Manzanar High School, where he was elected class president despite graduating at the very bottom of the class of 150 students. To keep spirits high amidst abysmal living conditions, Ralph planted trees, delivered mail, threw holiday parties enlivened with bands, and unfailingly fired up crowds at sporting events. With contraband homemade cameras, he pointed out the beauty all around them, even when it was hard to see. Ralph was just a kid from a Los Angeles neighborhood when he committed to go with his friends into what could only be termed a hellhole. But he remained the only non-spouse, non-Japanese who voluntarily relocated to Manzanar. His true heritage was only discovered when he was drafted, wouldn't you know, into the U.S. Army in August of 1944. Ralph served in the South Pacific until the end of the war and was awarded a Bronze Star for his bravery. But no one gave him a medal for standing up for his beliefs. Ralph Lazo was someone doing the faithful thing even when the outcome was uncertain. You might say hidden in plain sight. Martin Luther King Jr. was a martyr and a prophet. He would point to injustice, he would call our attention to it, and he would tell us what we needed to do about it based on his understanding of what Jesus would have us do. He pointed out where Jesus was hidden in plain sight from us. On August 28, 1963, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech about a dream that inspired future generations. Over 50 years later, his message lives on. I invite you to watch with me this morning a video. This poetic and provocative short film was created to inspire communities across the country to ask the question, how far have we come on the journey to social justice, and what must be done to achieve the dream King so eloquently articulated in 1963? The video is entitled, I Have a Dream.